that.
Okay, I think it's 6:30. It's time to start the meeting, and I'll open this up.
5:30.
I'm sorry, 5:30. It's 5:30. We'll start this meeting. I'll open it up and turn it over to Robin to make a presentation on the RMA moratorium. As soon as Mr. Smith.
I was going to start out by saying, if y'all had a chance to read Robin's email,
Yes.
pretty self-explanatory right there, I think. That's just my 2 cents. But I didn't mean it. I just had to say that.
So, what council member, or do you need to open up? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. What council member Ford is referring to is some of the limitations of the Fair Housing Act and some of the bases and that are acceptable for taking away multifamily housing, but more importantly, with the things that you have to be careful of. And that's what Tim and I have really been focusing on in our analysis of this issue. And that is that if you decide to get rid of any of the multifamily zoning classifications, that does not result in an impact to the people who are protected under the Federal Fair Housing Act. There are 7 protected characteristics under that act, and they are very similar to what you would see in any federal anti-discrimination lawsuit, the one or statute, excuse me, the ones that you're familiar with, such as Title VII, religion, race, that sort of thing. But there's also a component to the Fair Housing Act that protects lower income individuals. So what we need to be careful of is whatever decision is made here, that it doesn't force those people out of the city or not provide them with an opportunity to find housing within the city. And so that's what we really looked at. We, do you want to jump in, Tim, or you want me to keep talking?
Go ahead.
Okay.
You're doing good.
We looked at all of the different rental properties in the city and really looked at the opportunity for low-income housing and those that qualify for that housing to obtain it within the city. And we found that, what are there, Tim? 3 apartment complexes in the city?
Actually, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, there's 5.
Apartment complexes, or are you
Yes.
including?
Yes, out of that 5, all were at 100% occupancy except for 1, which was at 96% occupancy.
And so what we found was, there are about, this is an approximate number, about 1,082 units that are for rent within the city. And the nice thing is several of the apartment complexes in the city do have a percentage of units reserved for low-income housing. Particularly the one that I think we were surprised and impressed the most with was Alexander Crossing. Alexander Crossing has 240 units available for rent, but 168 of those units are set aside for low-income housing.
Correct.
Can you repeat those numbers one more time?
Sure, there are 240 units, and there are 168 of those units are set aside specifically for low-income housing. So that's great. Now, what Tim says is true, they're at a 96% occupancy rate. So although they have those units available, clearly they're very popular and there are not a lot vacant at the moment. There were some others that we looked at. Meadow Trace has some set aside for lower income, same with the Muse. They are both at 100% occupancy, right?
Correct.
But what we also considered is that you've got potentially roughly about 550 apartment units that are, we think, going to come online based on the proposed developments at Logan and Maxi Price and the one on Sharon Church. There are some areas of Loganville that are vacant, undeveloped. There are not a lot, though.
No, there's not.
that could be zoned to RMA. But again, there are very few properties that would qualify for that. But based on what we saw, again, the units that are specifically set aside for low-income housing, the fact that Alexander Crossing is not 100% full at the moment. They're close, but they're not there now. And also that you have these additional apartments coming online. And there is an IRS, like a federal tax credit that these apartment owners can get for offering low-income housing. And I think we figured out that the majority of the apartments in Loganville do have some percentage set aside for lower income housing. And I will tell you, it's a trend in the Atlanta area because it's advantageous to the owners of these complexes because they get a tax credit.
If, say Maxi Price builds new apartments or some behind the school over there, does he have to set aside some of those as low-income housing?
No. No one is required to do that.
Okay.
But it appears to be a common practice in Loganville, and it is certainly a trend, at least in the metropolitan Atlanta area, to do that. Because again, they get a tax credit. So, if you look at the rental property that you have now that's RMA, if you look at these apartments that are coming online, which we don't know, but we anticipate that there may be a portion of those set aside for low-income housing. I don't see that you would run afoul of the Federal Fair Housing Act if you were to get rid of RMA, if that's the city's, the way you want to go. I think you would be okay at this point in time. That doesn't mean that when these apartment complexes come online, if they don't have anything set aside for lower income housing, if we take another look at it and there's really less available, say in a year than what's there now, you may be required to put RMA back as a classification. Does that make sense?
Okay, question, the 1,082 units for rent, is that citywide? That's what we think is available now? Mm-hmm. So just Alexander Crossing alone, that's about 15% of what's available.
Mm-hmm. But understand that you're at a 96% occupancy rate.
But does the government even look at percentages?
Well, it's not, and there's not a math equation I can give you to say, okay, this is enough to have available. What they're going to look at is, could someone afford to move into the city of Loganville? And the government is going to look at, that doesn't mean that you're putting them out, way out in commercial nowhere land. They have to be able to move into the city and be a part of the city just like everybody else. That's what they're going to look at. So the question then is, do you have units available for someone to do that?
Okay. And we do.
So, Robin, from what I'm getting from your email and what you just said, we don't want to do away with RMA.
I'm getting the opposite.
No, that's not what she.
What I'm saying, the email that I sent you was by way of, you need to be careful of why.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you can't do it, but you need to be able to explain why you're going to do it. And you need to be able to, the words they use are substantial justification, which is a legal term of art. You've got to be able to explain why you're doing it. Just like when we regulate signs, you have to explain why you're doing it. And so that if you ever, come into a legal challenge about it, you have to be able to say, well, this is what we considered, this is what we looked at, and this is why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if we do away with RMA and we have a complaint, or somebody files a complaint with the federal government in the Fair Housing Act?
That is a possibility, and we discussed that. A couple things. You run that risk every time you take action as the city.
Mm-hmm.
That someone is going to disagree with that and come forward and challenge it in a legal setting. If you decide to get rid of RMA and that happens, that's where you have to be able to explain why you did it. If the government then says, well, that's not going to cut it, then you say, okay, well, that was we considered these factors. We made a good faith decision. It wasn't based on any protected characteristics. But if you disagree with us, then we'll put RMA back into a classification.
So we could just put it back without any,
They may be able to impose some fines, do things, the way that the federal government does, right?
Mhm.
But you can imagine the speed at which that might occur. And also the current political climate for enforcing the FHA is pretty low.
So I know you cautioned us in the past when we want to make an ordinance change, that sometimes it's not that easy to change it back. Is this fairly easy to change back if we needed to?
Well, you remember we talked about, I forget what the classification was, that we have a classification that we've gotten rid of in the zoning ordinance.
R16, yes.
R16. And it's still in the ordinance because we still have property that's zoned R16. That's the way that this will work. RM8 will still be in the ordinance because there will be properties that are grandfathered in under that classification. So if it became something where we needed to reinstate it, it's already in the ordinance.
Okay.
And the way it's stated in the ordinance, it would be stated the same way it is under R16. In the definition or the established districts in the ordinance, under R16, it says inactive. So the RM8 would be classified the same way. Everything would still be in the ordinance as guidelines for properties that are currently zoned that, but it would be an inactive classification. So you wouldn't be able to apply for a rezone any property to that.
Okay. And what's coming online is what we're calling the maxi price apartments?
Yes, that's on Atlanta Highway.
Right.
Okay. And then Logan's Point?
Logan Point, they have their development permit, so they're already turning dirt on that project. The Maxi Price project is still under plan review. They hadn't been given any permits yet.
Okay. And then Sharon Church Road?
Nothing's been turned in on that one yet.
And that is
but
RMA.
We're anticipating it being turned in, yes.
but
And what others do we have?
from what I hear on Sharon Church, it will not be apartments.
I
It's
don't know.
zoned for that.
It's, like I said, no paperwork has been
Right, I
turned in on
understand.
that. But it does have the RM zoning on
It
the
does.
property.
I
Yes.
agree, it does.
So whether he decides to build townhomes, condominiums, apartments.
Right.
And that may be something that we'll need to keep an eye on if
Yes.
you all decide to do away with RMA.
And what others do we have?
You got a few on my street, on Old Zion Cemetery.
Yeah, but they're already built. They're not vacant zone.
No, but there are low income, right?
Yes. And they're at 100% occupancy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Dang, I was gonna get a room there.
Which one is that we're talking about?
On Old Zion Cemetery.
What's the name of it?
Oh, gosh. I don't even know the name of it. I go
don't know.
back.
That's okay. I just didn't know, Tim, is that the one with the 2 or 3 year wait?
Yes.
Right down from Popeyes.
Because if I remember correctly, they do have a certain amount set aside for low income, but those low income units, there's a several year wait, right?
Yes.
Which was interesting to me when you have a several year wait at those, but you have vacancies at Alexander Crossing.
Right.
I'm not sure why that is.
It's probably the price point on the
Mhm.
rent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what other classifications have multifamily?
Say that again?
What other classifications have multifamily?
I don't understand the question.
We have RM8 and then,
RM6.
We RM6 and
Four and
RM4.
two.
and
And then we have the PUV, which is multi-use. That's commercial, residential mixed.
and there's nothing that says that they couldn't set aside low income, right?
Yes. And that's a good point. I would not recommend at this point doing away with any classification other than RM8 unless you wanted to adjust the overlay. Because I think you do need to maintain your RM6 and 4.
Okay.
And most developers don't ask for the RM4 or RM6 because there's just not enough density to make it worth their while.
Tim, remind me, what was the vacancy for the Loganville Housing Authority units? Do you recall?
In Loganville, they have 2 facilities, they call them, and they have wait lists.
Okay.
They didn't say how long the waiting list was. It's ran through the Monroe Housing Authority, and they have complexes in Monroe Social Circle and Loganville, and at all 3 cities, they have waiting lists.
Tim, just
But
How
that
many
is
units?
that is run by HUD.
how many units are in this one right up here? You know,
20.
20? Okay. Very neat, very well kept.
Social Circle has 70 and Monroe has 383.
Whoa. Okay.
So I guess I feel comfortable knowing that we have roughly over 1,600, what's available now and what's coming, that we could abolish the RM8, knowing that we could easily turn it back around if we needed to.
Yes, we do need to keep an eye on it, I think. And can you explain why you would like to do that?
To slow down the growth?
Okay. And certainly we've heard from citizens that would prefer owned property, I guess is the term I'm looking for, as opposed to rental. And so I think what you all are considering doing right now is to respond to the citizen concerns and to slow down the growth. Certainly that has been heard loud and clear from the citizens that they don't want any more development. So I think that when you all are talking about RM8, you are responding to that concern more than anything else, is what I take away from the meetings that we've had over the last, say, 6 months. That really people want to slow down the development and that this is a way to do that. I've heard a lot of concerns about traffic. Unlike zoning, this is an area where you can discuss traffic. And certainly if you have these higher density developments, I mean, that, as we've heard discussed again and again in the zoning cases that have come before y'all lately, where people have proposed higher density uses, the traffic is a huge concern. And so, arguably reducing the ability to develop these higher density multifamily units could reduce that, more traffic coming in and help to assuage some of the concerns that the citizens have broached. Same goes for the school overcrowding. And I don't know that to be a fact, but I do know that it has come before you all as a commentary from the citizens, something that they're concerned about.
And what about the land use map? How does that come into play next time that needs to be updated?
Well,
The future land use map doesn't show specific zonings. It just shows categories of zonings. Like it'll
Okay.
show residential, but it doesn't show specific zonings like RM8 or R22. It just shows it as residential or commercial use.
And when do we update that again?
It was last updated, I think we adopted it in 18. So we'll do a overview update in 23 and a complete update in 28. It's every 10 years, but every 5 years you can do minor changes to it.
So at that time, depending on what Loganville looks like with the growth, it could be said that there would be more RM8 or density type land categories on that, on the map.
Well, like I said, it just shows residential or commercial. It doesn't show
Okay.
whether it's RM8 or single family.
Okay,
That's what your zoning map's for.
okay.
But the zoning map just shows existing, not future use.
So Lisa, do you understand? Are these even on? Can y'all hear me? Okay. Do you understand about extending the moratorium? Would you explain that, like you did to me?
So if y'all decide to make a change to the zoning ordinance and remove the RM8 zoning at Thursday night's meeting, you will need to extend the moratorium for another 60 days because it'll expire after Thursday night's meeting. Because if we're going to make a change and remove that, it has to go through the same process as any zoning. It has to be advertised in the paper, has to go before the planning commission before it comes to the city council. So y'all will need to extend that moratorium for 60 days so we can go through the timeline process of changing the ordinance.
Okay. So do we vote on anything tonight or make a recommendation, or are we just simply talking?
We're just talking
Okay.
now, and I think it's up to y'all as a committee to make a recommendation to the council.
Okay. Danny, how do you feel?
Excuse me, would you make that recommendation tonight?
Mhm.
Okay.
So I'd like to make the recommendation unless y'all have any more discussion. You good, Bill?
So y'all looked at how many we have. Is there any, did you go and look at, like, is there any common densities? You know, you mentioned, we got Monroe, Lawrenceville, all the other areas. Do we have an idea compared to how many units, houses you have versus apartments? Did y'all look at any type of
No,
comparison?
there's no way for us to determine how many houses they are for rent in the city.
Okay.
So,
And we were also frankly focused on the higher density multifamily classifications because I understood that's what
Right.
the concern was with. But, to your
So-
point, if there was a way to do that, it could support this even more. If there's some evidence that there are, other housing availabilities that are at a lower price point, even if they are houses or something like that.
Well, I think it's safe to say that every neighborhood's going to have some kind of low-income supplemented housing. I just don't know how we would tell, but I'm certainly the government would know.
They might.
So if they called us out on this, I think it'd make our numbers look better.
Do you know,
but I mean, there's no way we could find out
Right.
how many houses in your subdivision is Section 8. You know what I mean? Or even rental for that matter.
So then what about, and I know we've got our city, which is bisected by 2 counties, but in this, if you look just in our immediate area, just outside of our city boundaries, what, do you have any idea how many RM8 type housing, multi-density, higher density complexes there are within, say, a couple miles of our city? Do you have any idea?
We didn't look at that. We were just looking at inside the city.
Right.
And, I don't think the federal government would look at that when they come to us and ask, how come we got rid of our RM8? They're going to do it to us as a city and not what's surrounding us.
Sure.
I know they're building a lot of apartments, especially on the west side. So,
Tim's right, that the government's not going to look at what's around us, but if there are other complexes that are being built, it may help relieve, or provide some other options and maybe lower the, the 96% occupancy rate.
Right.
Which is why, again, it's something that needs to be reviewed every year or so, I would think. Or maybe even reviewed when these other apartment complexes come online. Let's see what their,
Yeah, because right now, we don't know what their price point's going to be.
and if they'll have any set aside for, lower income folks.
Right.
You have anything else, Bill?
No.
Danny? Anybody in the audience? Melanie? I just want to clarify something, because y'all are intermingling, in my mind, two separate things from what I've researched. Y'all are talking about low-income housing, and we're talking about affordable housing. And so you're worried about the RM8 and the affordable housing, and the government defines affordable housing as you take the median income for an area, and a housing that's affordable should not use more than 30% of your income. So if we're doing that, you're putting low-income housing in something, you're intermingling the two things. So RM8 wouldn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to have affordable housing, because what I researched and found was that people that live in apartments actually tend to pay anywhere from 35 to 50% of their income to live in that, so that's not even affordable housing. Most of our subdivisions here do already have a majority of Section 8. We're covered well on low-income housing. We're talking about affordable housing. And doing away with RM8 is not going to reduce your amount of affordable housing in this town.
So are you saying you oppose getting rid of RMA?
No, I'm for getting rid of RM8, just for what y'all are talking about, the low-income housing part of that. But you're mixing your two things. You're talking about low-income housing as being linked to RM8, but you keep saying affordable housing, and I want to clarify where you're going with affordable housing versus low-income housing.
I'm not sure I quite understand what you're saying, but I will say that we focused on RM8 because it's the highest density multifamily zoning classification that the city currently has. Generally speaking, the higher density, you can see the difference in the density allowed under RM8, for instance, as opposed to RM4. Isn't RM4 duplexes, Tim? And so they're not going to allow as many units, and they're going to be larger in, say, RM4 than in RM8. Again, you have 550 odd units that are coming up to be developed in RM8. Those are going to be different price points. And historically, the apartment complexes that you would get out of RM8 would be of more concern under an FHA analysis than the lower density multifamily zoning classifications. But either way, we're saying the same thing.
We're saying the same thing, but affordable housing, I just want to clarify whether you're talking about low income or affordable housing.
Well, I think that you could refer to both of those in this discussion because they're both relevant.
And I forgot my other question. If I remembered, I'll come back.
Okay.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? No? Okay, well, I guess I'd like to make the recommendation that the committee does away with the RM8 zoning. We have a motion?
Sure, second.
Okay.
You make a motion.
I made the motion.
She made
Or
the
you
motion.
made the motion.
Yeah.
And second. All right, so everybody, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And it passes.
Do you want to review the amendments we talked about?
To do away with the RM8, to, I guess make it inactive would be the right word.
I thought that we were postponing that.
Okay. Well, the amendments to the ordinance.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to let you all know, since you're the planning and zoning committee, that we are going to, there's some language in the zoning ordinance that I think needs to be cleaned up a little bit about the planning commission appointments. So I just wanted to put that out there that we will be drafting that, presenting and running it through Janice, her commission. And so you should see those probably in October. It's just housekeeping, little things to fix, make it easier on everyone. Can you not hear me?
Okay, and I think that's all we have.
Yes.
And I'll make the motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And it passes.
Okay.
Thank you all.